On a cold, early winter night at the bus station, a poor black single mother struggles to buy a ticket for her sick son, only to come up $3 short. A quiet stranger steps in and pays without saying a word. And when he uncovers the truth she was forced to bury, a silent fight for justice begins to rise once more. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The wind pressed low across Monroe Station, slipping in through the seams of the old terminal building like it had done it 1,000 nights before. It was the kind of cold that didn't bite all at once. It crept in, slow and patient, crawling past coat linings, seeping into concrete and settling into the backs of knees and bones. The overhead lights flickered in long, buzzing lines, bathing the benches and tiled floor in a tired amber hue. Trash skittered in small gusts near the corners, and a vending machine blinked in stubborn protest near the far wall. It was a few minutes past 11. Most of the crowd had thinned out. The few who remained were hunched into themselves. Night workers, runaways, mothers with tired eyes, men trying not to look too homeless. The place smelled of stale coffee, heating ducts, and something metallic beneath it all, like rust or maybe fatigue. Amara Jenkins stood a few feet from the ticket kiosk, her shoulders drawn in beneath a worn olive coat. It wasn't thick enough. She had zipped it up all the way, but the sleeves were frayed at the cuffs, and she kept one arm wrapped tight around her son, who was shivering against her side. Caleb coughed, his breath short and shallow. The sound rattled in his chest, dry and hollow. Amara placed her hand gently on his back, feeling the light tremor in his ribs. His forehead had burned against her palm earlier that evening. The cough had been worse over the last few days. The apartment was too damp, the windows thin, and the air thick with exhaust and mold they couldn't afford to scrub out. "Almost there, baby," she murmured, brushing a small lock of hair from his damp brow. "Just a little longer." She guided him toward the ticket kiosk. The screen glowed an impersonal blue, pulsing with soft advertisements and bus schedules. Her fingers hovered for a moment, stiff from the cold, before she tapped through the menu. One child ticket, round trip, departing tonight. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke the words to herself. It was habit. She missed speaking to real people behind the glass. The price blinked onto the screen. Amara froze. It was only a few dollars more than she had calculated, but enough to make her stomach clench. Her hand moved automatically, reaching into her bag, fingers searching past tissues and an inhaler and the folded grocery list she had stopped using. She found her debit card and slid it through the reader. She held her breath. Declined. The beep wasn't loud, but it felt sharp, like something had cracked in the silence. Amara looked down at the screen, pressed her lips together, and tried again. She swiped slower this time, as if careful movement might change the outcome. Declined. Her mouth went dry. She pulled out her phone, her thumb trembling slightly as she unlocked the screen. The Wi-Fi was slow, and the loading wheel spun longer than she could stand. When the balance finally appeared, she understood. A payment had posted, her utility bill. The one she had held off on for a week too long. It had drained what was left. Her account sat $3 short. She stood still for a moment, her face blank. Then, without a word, she stepped back from the kiosk, drawing Caleb a little closer. He leaned against her hip, still coughing. His cheeks were flushed, his nose running just slightly in the dim light. The young man behind the counter, barely older than 20, glanced up from his monitor. He had watched the exchange in silence. His eyes were tired, like someone pulling too many double shifts, but they weren't unkind. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked hesitantly. "I can't pay right now," she replied. Steady but quiet. "Just keep the ticket. I'll come back." The words didn't shake. That was important to her. She didn't look around, didn't raise her voice or explain herself. She just turned and knelt beside her son. Her hands worked automatically, zipping his jacket higher, tucking the collar close around his neck. "I know it's cold," she whispered to him. "We'll figure it out. I promise." She stood, lifting his backpack and taking his hand. Behind them, a man stepped forward. He hadn't been there before, or maybe he had. The kind of man you didn't notice until he wanted to be noticed. Tall, dark coat, gloves, hair silver at the temples but cut short and neat. His shoes were polished, but not showy. His face was unreadable, not cold, but closed, like someone who had practiced the art of stillness. He didn't say a word, he simply handed a black credit card to the attendant. The young man blinked. "Are you sure, sir?" he asked under his breath. The man nodded once. The card swiped clean, the screen chimed. AP proved. The ticket printed. The staff member looked uncertain, then quietly walked it over to Amara. She turned, confused. Her brows drew together slightly. "What?" she started. The man didn't speak. He wasn't smiling. He just met her gaze, steady, direct, and strangely familiar. Not like they had met, but like he recognized something in her. Not pity, not charity, something deeper, something quieter. Amara's jaw tensed, her pride rose up instinctively, but her son coughed again, and she swallowed it. She nodded once. "Thank you," she said. Not weak, not meek, just sincere. She took the ticket in one hand and Caleb's fingers in the other and turned toward the platform without another word. As they walked, she could feel the man's eyes on her back. She didn't look over her shoulder, she didn't ask questions, she just walked. Caleb tugged gently on her sleeve. "Mommy, who was that man?" She didn't answer right away. She just squeezed his hand tighter, leading him down the corridor where the yellow line on the tile led toward gate 6. The wind howled faintly through the cracked seals in the doors. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But someone who knew we needed help." Back at the counter, the man hadn't moved. He watched them go, mother and child, fading into the glow of the boarding gate, swallowed slowly by the machinery of night transit. He turned finally, the ticket monitor reflecting faintly in his glasses, and stepped into the shadowed quiet of the terminal. His name was Raymond Carter, but tonight, that didn't matter. What mattered was the look in her eyes, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. Not yet, not tonight, not for a long while. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Metrolink Transit's 34th floor, stretching across Glenvale like scattered gold leaf on black velvet. Below, the river coiled between dark blocks of concrete and glass, the street lamps catching its edges like flickering candlelight. It was nearing midnight, but the floor remained quiet, too high for the noise of traffic, too late for the shuffle of interns or janitors. Silence had crept in, respectful and absolute. Raymond Carter stood at the edge of his office, one hand tucked loosely into his pocket, the other resting against the cool ceramic of a coffee mug he hadn't touched in over an hour. The mug had long since gone cold. His eyes weren't on the city, not really. They were fixed on the monitor at his desk behind him, still glowing with the feed of the security system. He had meant to review performance data from the central hub. That was his habit. Every few nights, once the meetings ended and the building had emptied of polished shoes and nervous voices, Raymond would sit in silence and watch the system from above. Routes, cameras, transfer stations. Not for oversight. Not anymore. He did it because he remembered what it was like to be down there, unseen, and he liked to think someone was still paying attention. Tonight, however, the screen had pulled him into something else. It was the overhead camera from Monroe Station, time-stamped just a few hours earlier. The quality wasn't great, grainy black and white, slightly delayed. But it was clear enough to see the woman at the kiosk, standing still, shoulders drawn inward, and the boy beside her, leaning against her side with a cough that echoed faintly through the hall. Raymond had rewound the clip twice already. He sat down now, slowly, and dragged the cursor back once more. There it was again. The moment she stepped away from the machine, the screen flash declined, and she didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply stepped back with a breath so shallow it barely moved her chest. She turned to her son, no tears, no panic, and knelt beside him. She zipped his jacket higher, adjusted the collar, and whispered something soft. The boy coughed again, louder this time, and leaned into her shoulder like it was the only warmth he had in the world. Raymond leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the way she placed one hand flat between the boy's shoulder blades as they began to walk toward the exit. A dozen others passed them in the frame, commuters, drifters, late-shift nurses, but none of them looked, none of them saw her. Until that moment, Raymond reached for the keyboard and paused the footage. The frame froze at the exact second the boy lifted his head and whispered something to his mother. No sound, but the movement of his lips was unmistakable. "Mommy, it's cold." The mother turned her head slightly, just enough to tuck her son's chin beneath the collar of his coat. Her lips moved too, and Raymond read it plain: "It'll be okay." It was the way she said it, with no conviction and yet complete certainty, that stopped him. He knew that tone, knew it too well. It wasn't hope, it wasn't comfort, it was a promise made not to the child but to herself. The kind of vow you spoke when your own spine was shaking, but you had no right to let it show. He remembered hearing it once, years ago, from a woman sweeping the floor of an after-hours shelter on 19th Street. She had found him crouched behind the furnace, shivering, half-starved, and too ashamed to speak. She had handed him a cup of soup, and said nothing except, "One night at a time, baby. One night at a time." Raymond leaned back in his chair, and ran a hand slowly down his face. "Damn," he whispered to no one. He opened a new window on the terminal, and began typing. "Monroe Station, employee list, night shift, female dependent child." The results narrowed quickly. The list was short, and then her name appeared. Jenkins, Amara, custodial services, active since March, last year. He stared at it for a long moment. The name did something to his memory, stirred it like a stone tossed into a still pond. He knew it, not from a schedule, not from a payroll form, from somewhere else. He opened a new tab, typed, "Amara Jenkins, Glenvale journalist." The search engine hesitated. Then it delivered. Voice of the voiceless, how one black journalist took on Wester Chem and paid the price. From headlines to silence, Amara Jenkins and the fight for environmental justice, dismissed and discredited, the real cost of telling the truth. Raymond clicked. The article loaded slowly. The banner image showed a younger Amara, face firm, eyes clear, standing behind a row of folding chairs at a community town hall, microphone in hand, fire in her posture. Behind her was a banner that read, "Clean water is a right, not a privilege." Raymond swallowed hard. He remembered this now. He had followed the story loosely back then. Wester Chem dumping chemical waste into Hilford County groundwater, falsified reports, asthma outbreaks among children, rising cancer rates. The kind of thing you read about, and then forget a week later because the settlement never made front page. But her face had stayed with him. She had been everywhere, on panels, in hearings, in print. And then suddenly, nowhere, like someone had switched off the light. He clicked deeper. Lawsuit, countersuit, retraction from her former publication, anonymous threats, and then silence. Julian Moore, her partner, civil rights attorney, collapsed outside the courthouse, a stroke. No foul play, just years of pressure, long hours, too many cases, and not enough people listening. He died 3 days later. Raymond looked back at the name on the employee database, Amara Jenkins, custodial services. He reached for the coffee cup, lifted it halfway, then set it back down. He stood up and moved toward the glass wall, hands tucked behind his back, eyes on the city far below. He could see the distant flicker of Monroe Station's rooftop, just a dull outline tucked between two buildings like a forgotten shoebox. He remembered sleeping in a boiler room at 17, the heat pipes clanging beside his head, stomach growling loud enough to wake himself up. He remembered the woman who sat down beside him, with a mop bucket and a paper towel wrapped around a sandwich. She didn't ask why he was there. She just said, "If you're waiting for someone to rescue you, stop. You only need one person who believes you deserve more. That's it. One." Raymond closed his eyes. "That look in her face," he muttered. "I've seen it before. Hell, I've worn it." He turned back to the monitor, the frozen image still there. Amara with her hand on her son's back, shielding him like he was all she had left, and maybe he was. Raymond didn't move for a long while. He just stood there, quiet, with the hum of the city below, and a memory in his chest that refused to fade. Not tonight. Not anymore. The basement level of Metrolink headquarters was a different world after midnight. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly above long sterile hallways, casting pale white lines along polished tile floors. The walls were painted institutional gray, but age and wear had given them a yellowed cast. Vending machines hummed quietly in the break alcove near the freight elevator, offering stale chips and warm soda no one really wanted. The air was cool, but dry, and the only sounds came in intervals: the distant clatter of a mop bucket, the hiss of an automatic door opening in the delivery bay, the occasional echo of rubber soles crossing linoleum. Amara Jenkins pushed her cart carefully down the north corridor, the mop handle resting against her shoulder. She had her sleeves rolled up, exposing the fine scars on her forearms from a decade-old oil heater accident. Her hair was tied back neatly, though wisps had escaped and clung to her temple with sweat. A utility belt hung from her hip, a ring of keys jangling lightly with each step. She moved with the efficiency of someone who knew every inch of the building, but her eyes stayed downcast, her jaw tight. She never lingered in one place longer than needed. She never looked into security cameras, and she never left without checking every lock twice. She didn't hear the footsteps at first, too soft, too deliberate, but she felt them. Something shifted in the atmosphere. That subtle static in the air when someone is behind you and watching but not yet speaking. She stopped moving, straightened her back, and placed both hands on the mop handle in front of her like it was something to brace against. Raymond Carter stepped into view from the side hallway, his coat collar turned up slightly, shadows falling across the lines in his face. His eyes were calm, but focused, like he wasn't sure how she would react, but he had accepted the risk. His hands were at his sides, open, no clipboard, no phone, no badge, just him. Amara didn't flinch, but her posture shifted. She turned toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're not supposed to be down here," she said, her voice low, not confrontational, but far from welcoming. Raymond stopped a few feet from her, not moving closer. He nodded once. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Amara narrowed her eyes slightly, waiting. When nothing else came, she exhaled through her nose, subtle and slow. "You looking to file a complaint about the floors?" she asked. Dry. Raymond gave a faint smile, but it faded before it could settle. "No, the floors are fine." Amara watched him carefully. Her fingers tightened slightly on the mop handle. She had been approached before. Executives mistaking her silence for invitation, offering condolences or small talk with no real interest in her answers. This didn't feel like that. This felt heavier. But that didn't mean she trusted it. "You followed me at the station," she said, not accusingly, just stating what she knew. "I did," Raymond admitted. "Not at first, but I saw you. You and your son." Amara tilted her head, just slightly. "You always buy strangers tickets. Or just mothers who look like they're running out of options." Raymond shook his head. "I don't make a habit of it, but I've been there. I recognize something." "That right?" Her tone wasn't sarcastic, but it carried weight, like a door half closed. "I grew up in foster care," he said, his voice even. "Bounced through 12 houses before I turned 16, ended up on the streets 2 years later. Spent a winter in a boiler room under the old train depot on 19th. No one knew I was there, no one cared." Amara didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared at him, the mop handle still locked in her hands. "One night," Raymond continued, "I was ready to give up. I had enough change for a bus ride to nowhere, or a stale sandwich from the vending machine. I picked the sandwich, sat behind the furnace and waited for the night to pass." He paused, his voice dropped slightly. "A woman named Clara came through. Janitor, 62, probably 5 feet tall with her shoes on. She found me, didn't call the cops, didn't ask what I was doing, just sat beside me. Handed me a paper towel with half a peanut butter sandwich inside and said, 'If you're waiting for someone to rescue you, stop. All you need is one person who sees you.'" Amara blinked once, slowly. Her jaw was still clenched, but something in her shoulders had shifted, less braced now, more alert. Raymond exhaled softly. "I didn't come down here to fix anything for you. I know you're not broken. I just wanted you to know I saw you. That's all." Just then, light footsteps echoed from the far corridor. A small figure appeared at the edge of the hallway, dragging a worn backpack and rubbing sleep from his eyes. Caleb shuffled forward in socks, his sneakers left near the janitor's closet. His hair was messy from lying on the cot in the supply room. He blinked, then stopped abruptly when he saw Raymond. "Hey," Caleb said, pointing. "It's the bus guy." Raymond's brows lifted slightly. A small surprised smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I guess I am." Amara turned, startled. "Caleb, baby, what are you doing up?" Caleb walked over to her and leaned into her side. "I was thirsty. I couldn't sleep." "He's the guy from the station. The one with the shiny card." Raymond lowered himself slightly, careful not to crowd the boy. "Glad the ride worked out." Caleb grinned, then looked up at his mother. "Can he stay a minute?" Amara didn't answer at first. She looked at Raymond, not suspicious, not grateful, just quiet, measuring. Then slowly, she nodded. "1 minute." Raymond stood again. "I'll go. I just wanted to say this before I do." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small padded envelope. He handed it to her carefully, as though it might break. Amara didn't take it right away. She looked at it, then at him. "What is it?" "Something I think belongs back in your hands," Raymond said. "No strings, just truth." Amara took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. Raymond turned to leave. "I won't bother you again," he said over his shoulder. "But if you ever decide you're ready for someone to stand behind you instead of in front, I'll be here." He walked away without waiting for a reply, his footsteps echoing down the sterile hallway until they faded completely. Amara stood in place for a long time, holding the envelope in one hand and Caleb's warm fingers in the other. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where Raymond had disappeared. She didn't say anything. Not yet. That night, long after Caleb had fallen asleep on the cot beside the mop sink, Amara sat alone in her apartment. The envelope lay unopened on the kitchen table. She had turned it over a dozen times but hadn't broken the seal. The light above her buzzed softly, casting slow shadows along the counter. She rested her fingers on the envelope. She didn't open it, but she didn't throw it away either. The old Glenvale Community Center stood where the street cracked around the edges and the weeds grew between the sidewalk tiles, like they were reclaiming lost ground. Amara Jenkins pushed open the door slowly, her fingers still wrapped around the worn brass handle even after it had opened. She stepped inside, her boots echoing softly on the tile. Her breath made small clouds in the air. The heat had long stopped working. She pulled her coat tighter and walked down the corridor, passing faded murals she herself had helped paint a lifetime ago. She paused by the room at the end of the hall, the one with the long table and the bulletin board that used to hold flyers about water rights, tenant unions, voter drives. The flyers were gone now, and the cork was mottled with tacks that had never been pulled. She stepped into the room. Raymond Carter was already there, seated at the same folding chair she used to speak from years ago. No security, no coat and tie, just him in a plain jacket, a thermos in his hand, steam rising lazily from the lid. He looked up as she entered, and stood slowly, not with formality but respect. He didn't offer a handshake. Amara remained by the doorway, one hand still gripping the strap of her bag. "You really picked this place?" she asked, her voice quiet but not uncertain. Raymond nodded. It felt right. She took a few slow steps in, her eyes scanning the room like it might still be haunted by old meetings and louder voices. "Used to be something here," she said, not asking, just remembering aloud. "I know," he replied. "I used to sleep in the boiler room below this floor. That was a long time ago." Amara didn't respond. She sat down across from him, dropping her bag by the leg of the chair with a soft thud. "You said no strings. But then there's a job offer, folder full of reports, letters from people I haven't heard from in years." She kept her voice even, her fingers laced tightly in front of her on the table. "You digging up my past to sell some redemption story?" Raymond didn't flinch. "No." "Then why?" Her eyes stayed fixed on him, sharp and unmoving. "Why now? Why me?" "Because I look like a good headline next to your company's logo." Raymond exhaled slowly. "You're not a headline, Amara. And you're not a symbol. I didn't come to rescue you. I came because I failed to stand up when people like you were being buried. And maybe I'm tired of hiding behind excuses and boardroom silence." He paused, then looked her square in the eyes. "I'm not repaying a debt, I'm answering one, and I don't care if anyone sees it but you." Amara leaned back, her eyes narrowing, but her jaw no longer locked. Something in her chest tightened, not from anger, but the slow unwinding of armor she hadn't realized was still in place. "You really believe putting me in a room full of suits is going to change anything?" she asked. "I don't know," Raymond said. "But I believe you've never stopped caring. And I think people need someone in that room who remembers why the truth costs something." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind outside rattled a loose window pane. Somewhere in the building, a pipe hissed and settled. Finally Amara reached down, pulled the envelope from her bag, and placed it on the table. She tapped her fingers against it once, twice, then slid it toward him. "I haven't accepted yet," she said. "But I'm not saying no either." Raymond nodded slowly. "That's enough." The first day at Metrolink's downtown headquarters was quiet in all the wrong ways. Amara stood outside the elevator on the 12th floor, badge clipped to her lapel, holding a canvas bag filled with notepads and a thermos of tea. She had worn her best blazer, though the sleeves were a little too short and the shoulders too wide. Her shoes pinched at the toes. She stepped into the corridor, where glass offices lined the walls and muted conversation buzzed behind frosted partitions. No one spoke to her. They looked up when she passed. Some nodded, most didn't. They recognized her name, and if they didn't, they recognized the whisper that followed it. Journalist. Custodian. That woman. Her new desk was tucked in a corner, not far from the community outreach team. The chair creaked. The monitor had a flicker in the top corner. She sat down anyway. The first email arrived at 9:17 a.m. The second came just after lunch. Small slips of paper tucked beneath her keyboard. Different handwriting each time, but the ink was steady. First clear eyes, good questions. The next that was the right point to raise. She didn't need a signature to know where they came from. Each day brought a new one. Not flattery, not guidance. Just acknowledgement. A quiet hand resting on the back of her chair without ever touching her. Still the unease didn't fade. Meetings passed where her suggestions were met with silence. Her name was left off invites. Her ideas were rephrased and repeated by someone else 2 minutes later, suddenly met with agreement. She endured it. She had seen worse, but she had never gotten used to being invisible. It was Caleb's fever that undid her. It came on fast. A dry cough by dinner, flushed cheeks by bedtime. By midnight, his breathing was shallow, and his lips had gone pale. Amara didn't wait. She wrapped him in his coat and lifted him into the back seat of a borrowed sedan. She didn't stop to find matching socks or pack a bag. She drove through red lights and potholes, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they cramped. The emergency room glowed sterile under harsh lights. She sat in the waiting room for hours, Caleb curled against her chest, his breath hot and uneven. When the nurse called his name, she stood too fast and nearly stumbled. The forms were a blur. The questions sounded like echoes underwater. Time bent, machines beeped. A plastic chair dug into her spine. And then she felt someone sit down beside her. She didn't need to look. Raymond didn't say anything. He didn't ask. He didn't explain how he knew. He just handed her a cup of vending machine coffee, and sat with both hands resting on his knees. At one point, she leaned forward and pressed her hands against her face. Her shoulders shook, but no sound came out. Raymond reached over, not to hold her, just to steady her. A hand on her back, a breath shared in the silence. She didn't thank him, but she didn't pull away either. That night, the corridor lights dimmed to conserve power. The nurse brought news. Caleb's fever had broken. Flu. Nothing more. Amara exhaled for the first time in hours. Raymond stood and stepped back. She turned her head, finally looking at him. There was nothing said. But something between them had changed. Not repaired. Revealed. The sky over Glenvale held the color of poured silver that morning. The clouds low but not heavy, as if they knew better than to interrupt the day with rain. Rows of white folding chairs lined the new park plaza, their metal legs pressed neatly into the pavement, still marked with chalk from construction crews. Behind them young trees swayed gently in the breeze, their roots tucked into fresh soil beside signs that read "Justice grows here." At the edge of the park, the glinting metal frame of the new Justice Line station gleamed, its curved canopy stretching out like open arms above the first waiting bus. Amara Jenkins stood near the stage in a simple navy blazer, one she had borrowed from a friend who told her it made her look like she belonged there. She tugged the hem gently, then folded her hands to still their nervous twitch. Her shoes clicked softly against the stone platform as she stepped forward. A modest crowd had gathered. Residents, reporters, city officials, former tenants of the Poison District, and a handful of children sitting cross-legged in the front row. Caleb sat among them, his backpack beside his feet, a folded drawing clutched between his hands. The microphone waited for her in the center. Amara didn't bring notes, she hadn't written anything down. The truth, she had decided, should not come from a page today. She stepped up slowly, placing both hands on the edge of the podium. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried. There was no quiver in it. Years ago she began. I stood in a room not so different from this, just a few blocks from here. I spoke then about water, about health, about the quiet violence that happens when neighborhoods are seen as disposable. I spoke about soil too toxic for children to play in, and rivers that no longer sang. She paused, scanning the crowd, her eyes resting for a moment on a man with deep lines on his brow, holding the hand of his adult daughter, one of the first families to testify back when no one had listened. Amara continued, "That was the last time I spoke to a room of strangers. After that, I was told to be quiet. I was called a liar, I was called angry. But I was never wrong." Her breath deepened, not from nerves, but from memory. "Today I won't name the corporations who sent letters to my door, or the ones who paid for silence. They already took too much space in this city. I'd rather name the people who never got named, the woman who boiled bottled water for her kids because the tap burned their skin, the grandfather who planted lemon trees even though the soil told him not to, the teacher who kept every test result her students ever brought to the nurse and mailed them to me when no one else would listen." The crowd shifted, quietly. A few tears, a few hands clenched. No applause, not yet. Amara steadied herself. This park is not redemption. It is not compensation. It is memory, made visible. And the bus line behind me, the Justice Line, is not a solution. It is a promise to keep going, to never again pretend we didn't know. She leaned forward just slightly. "My name is Amara Jenkins, and I did not come back to be thanked. I came back to finish what we started." She stepped away from the podium. The silence held for a long moment before the applause began, not wild, but steady, like rain falling on solid ground. A few people stood. Others simply nodded, hands over their chests. Raymond Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, just beyond the canopy. He wore no ribbon, no badge, he did not speak, he watched, after the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed to tour the walking paths and community garden. Amara joined Caleb near the new station. The first Justice Line bus sat quietly at the curb, its doors open, gleaming in the soft morning light. Caleb tugged at her sleeve, grinning. "Can I ride it, Mom?" he asked, already climbing the steps before she could answer. She followed him up, the scent of new fabric and clean vinyl rising around them. The driver nodded politely, tipping his cap. Amara walked down the aisle behind her son, her fingers brushing lightly over the seatbacks, each one still wrapped in plastic. Caleb picked a window seat and opened his backpack, pulling out the drawing he'd folded so carefully all morning. He smoothed it against the glass with both palms, then pulled tape from his pocket and began pressing the corners down one by one. The image was bright with crayon and marker, 3 figures in front of a silver bus stop, one woman with a braid and a notepad, one little boy with a red backpack, and one tall man in a dark coat. Above their heads, the words "Me Mom" and "The Bus Guy." Underneath, written in Caleb's uneven print, it read "Where the journey starts again." Amara sat down beside him, resting a hand gently over his. She didn't cry, she just breathed. deeply, like someone whose lungs were finally working again after a long silent winter. Outside the bus, Raymond remained by the edge of the park. He didn't wave. He didn't step forward, he simply stood, hands in his pockets, watching through the glass. Amara turned her head and met his gaze through the pane. She gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, just enough. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.